Thank you. Oh, here we go. So good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a large group from across Ontario, and we're really grateful for your interest in this really complex topic that isn't spoken about enough. So today we're going to be talking about the very complex issue of AFCCA, which stands for Aggression Toward Family and Caregivers in Childhood and Adolescence. You may have heard of this issue by other names. Tanya and Maud will be discussing that today, but we're really excited to actually have some strategies and ideas of how to support families that are experiencing this. Before we get started, I just want to give a land acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge that our presenters today, Tanya Eichler, Maud Champagne, and I all live and work on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. Maud lives just north of the beautiful Ottawa River. Tanya and I live just south of it. And all three of us recognize the Algonquin people as the customary keepers and defenders of our mighty Ottawa River watershed and its tributaries. And we honor the long history of welcoming many nations to this beautiful territory that we now know as our nation's capital. Many of you joining us today live and work on other traditional Indigenous unceded territories. So we invite you to join us in taking a moment to reflect and acknowledge this.
Thank you, Nancy.
And now let's a few housekeeping notes. You'll notice that there's both a chat function and a Q&A function for the webinar. Please know that if you write something in chat, you're more than welcome to, but that will be public. People will be able to see that it is you making the comment or asking the question. If you want to ask a question anonymously, please use the Q&A function. We will likely leave most questions until the end, so we'll have about 15 minutes at the end of the webinar for Q&A. But if you ask something that seems really relevant to the topic, I'll be monitoring the questions and I may jump in and ask Tanya and Maud the question at the time. We'll be together for about 2 hours. This is being recorded and you will be sent a copy of the recording to watch again after. I see some questions about whether you can get a PDF of the slides. That is certainly possible. So we'll discuss this, but we can send a PDF as well when we send you the recording. Also, please note that there are closed captioning functions available for this. So if you want closed captioning, just click on the Show Captions button at the bottom of your screen. So if we can just go to the next slide, please, Tanya. I just want to give you a little information about our team. So the 4 people that you see on the screen are the 4 members of Adopt for Life's AFCCA Family Supports Program. My name is Nancy Lockwood. I'm the co-director and practice lead of the program. On the right of the screen, you see Jen Drudge. Jen is our provincial parent liaison for our program. She offers peer support. Everybody who works at Adopt for Life is touched by adoption. We're all either adoptees or adoptive parents. I'm an adoptive parent. Jen is an adoptive parent of 4 children and 2 biological children. So she supports families by giving them resources, supporting them in groups, sharing her lived experience. And you're actually going to see a wonderful video by Jen a little further into our webinar. But at this point, I'm going to invite Tanya Eichler to introduce herself, please.
Hi, sorry, I just messed up. Oh, there we go. I just messed up the view of my thing. So hi, I'm Tanya Eichler, not technologically advanced myself. I'm a psychotherapist in the Ottawa area. I kind of got into this. I'm also an adoptee. I'm a mother of 2 people who have some neurodiverse things going on. And I am also, I worked for a number of years in British Columbia as an FASD key worker, and that's where I kind of got into the field of neurodiversity and got a little more expert at it at home. And I came to Ottawa, gosh, almost 9 years ago when I met Nancy and some others in the FASD world here, and we helped start the field called resource program in Ottawa. Nancy and Janet, who I believe is in the audience, and myself and Mo came along as well. And so we did that. And then I went into my private practice full time, where I specialize supporting adoption, trauma, attachment, those sorts of kind of themes. I love this work. We all started together last summer with this program, and there's 1.5 clinical leads, so I'm the half in this program. Go for it, Maude.
Yes, and just to let you know, Tanya, people have noticed that they can see the notes. So,
they can.
Well,
Okay.
But I know my next slide, so feel free to not stress over not sharing and then restart the thing without the presenter view, I guess.
Let's see if I can figure that out.
Yes, so I'll introduce myself. So I guess you don't need the PowerPoint with my picture. You can just see me here live. So similarly to Tanya, I'm a psychotherapist. I'm also a social worker. I'm a mom of 5 kids. 3 of them came to us by adoption. They were older children. It was international adoption. So now they're all teens. And they're interesting experience. And then I was also, like Tanya, an FASD worker back in Vancouver. As Tanya said, we launched the Feed All Call resource program here in Ottawa. And then I moved to my private practice. Like Tanya, we basically do very similar things, but I do it with a French accent. I also did my my PhD in on the topic of AFCCA, and this is not how it was all planned. You can even move to the next slide because I'll just
might take the computer a minute to catch up, but I will do that. Gonna take
so what happened is when I was doing my master's, I heard from a lot of families who were raising young people with FASD that they were experiencing a high level of dangerous behaviors or aggression from their young people. And then when I did my PhD, it was COVID, and things were just much worse, and it was quite aggravated by the pandemic. You know, loss of services, loss of mental health support, the routine was off, no school. Also for youth who are, you know, who have attachment difficulties, and you put them in a situation where they're together with their primary caregiver all the time, that can be something that set up some aggressive behaviors. So doing my PhD with Kids Brain Health Network at Queen's, our vision is to look at solutions. So we started researching, you know, what's happening in the world about this, and Adopt for Life was on the same mission. So we joined forces, and we created a consortium that was funded by Adopt for Life and Kids Brain Health Network with Tracy Moisan. Maybe some of you know her, and Laurie Cabral. And we nationally did a big consultation asking families, what are you experiencing? What does it look like for you? What are some of the diagnoses of your children? And we had policymakers, academia, families, young people, the justice sector, therapists, you know, we had so many people involved. And there's a website I'll show you. You can find out more information there. But one of our goals was to find a name for this that was not stigmatizing. Because what was used at the time, you may have heard the term CPVA, Child to Parent Violence and Aggression. And for young people who have been displayed aggression, it was very stigmatizing. There are reasons why they do this, and it just didn't feel respectful. So we consulted with all of them, and what was decided was aggression towards family and caregivers in childhood and adolescence, talking about when it happens, towards whom, And certainly this term is not necessarily encompassing because we know that sometimes it continues in adulthood, depending on, the reasons why there's AFCA. And sometimes it's beyond family members and caregivers. It can be at school, it can be in the community, depending on the situation. So we're still very much learning about AFCA. What are the interventions that are evidence-based? What are some that will work in the Canadian population? What are the ones that are helpful to caregivers? What's the language we need to use around it? So while we are sort of the experts today, we're very much on a learning journey and learning primarily from the people who are experiencing it, most of them on a daily basis. You can go to the next slide. And so when we ask in the consortium, who is AFCA, what does AFCA look like in your home? You can see that more than a quarter was saying that it was a daily occurrence in their home. It was mostly directed towards the parents. And sometimes there was self-harm. And in AFCA, self-harm looks like sometimes a threat, like if you don't do this for me, I will do this, or they get into dangerous behaviors. That's a common pattern. It's also towards siblings, towards pets, extended family, especially if they live in the home, and much less around peers and friends, as you can see here, but it does happen. And so you can see even on the slide, I won't name everything, but you can see what it looks like. It's mostly physical aggression, but also, the name calling, the threats. And you can see how damaging that could be for family members. You can switch to the next slide. Also, we were not necessarily surprised to see that the children that were represented were all impacted by mental health issues or neurodevelopmental disorders like fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, some learning disabilities, communication issues, also mental health. And most of them, like we didn't have one family who said my child has ADHD. It was all like a combination of mental health and neurodevelopmental disorders. So these were very complex kids. And what was tricky about it is that some of the young adults who had been displaying AFCA were saying, we have to be careful here because we don't want to say, oh, that means people with autism or FASD are all aggressive. So that's not what we're saying. Not all of them will display aggression, but this is certainly the cause of their self-regulation issues for many of them. So why children use aggression? There's a really wide body of research on why children or young people use aggression. There's many reasons, but it comes down to one thing. It's the self-regulation difficulties. Sometimes it's a type of aggression where they really want to control the environment. They're highly controlling. They decide who can get in their room, who can use the computer, how loud you're able to talk. And they make the rules for the whole family with threats of aggression. And that you may look at it and go like, okay, they're planning their behaviors, and some of them do and some of them don't. But even when they do, it's usually due to abuse history, attachment difficulties, mental health issues. And we're all like right now in the AFCCA program, I'd say that most people have FASD or were prenatally exposed to alcohol. All of them have some attachment disruption history and learning disabilities. They're all very complex children with amazing parents, but they need, as you will see in the next in this presentation, they need a lot of support because it's far from being easy. And I wrote perception at the top because this is something that I've been learning about more. A lot of these kids, when you ask them about why they're displaying AFCCA, they usually have a reasoning behind it. And either they felt like something was really unfair, they're really upset at their parents for something. And I'm not saying that they have the right perception all the time, but that's their perception, that's their truth. So we have to hear it and figure out, okay, how can we maybe modify that perception so that they could learn that adults can be safe, adults can be supportive, and most of the time we're doing our best, even if we that's not necessarily what they're seeing. And I think we can talk about it more in case studies. We'll do case studies today. Certainly anxiety is a big one. Like most of these kids are extremely anxious. And so what we're seeing in families is that when the child is very, very anxious, the parents accommodate, and they do need accommodation. So that's the tricky part, but sometimes there's an over accommodation. And it's a tricky balance to figure that out for families. Like, I'll give you an example. So my child is very anxious about school. He doesn't have all the accommodation that he needs at the school. So, you know, sometimes you may say, okay, I'm not going to send my child. Sometimes that might be a good decision, but sometimes it's not. Like I said, it's a tricky balance. Same with, you know, we're seeing kids who basically are playing video games all day long because they get addicted, and they will turn into aggression if there's limit setting in the home. So the parents will try to accommodate and maybe feel like they're walking on eggshells. So yeah, well, I guess we'll get into that later. Also priming, that's the last one I'm going to talk about on the list. Priming is when you get so used to using a certain behavior that you do it without thinking about it. Like, for example, if I were somewhere with Tanya, I step on her foot, I'm not even going to think, well, Maud, I think, you know, you should apologize. I'm just going to say, oh, sorry. You know, this just comes out. We're used to it. You bump into someone, you say sorry. Most of us anyway. And it's the same thing. So they're so used to using certain behaviors, like maybe the swearing or the name calling, that it just happens before, you know, they it can even go to their conscious mind. And we call this concept priming. And that's when it becomes very concerning, because the behavior will become more and more entrenched if we don't stop it with some intervention. So I'll let you switch to the next one. Okay. So this one, so when we ask families, what would you like to see? Like, what's a good outcome for you if you're experiencing AFCCA? Honestly, I thought they would say, I want the behaviors to stop, like the aggressive behaviors. And some of them did mention it, but many people said, well, you know what? I'm raising a very complex child. It is possible that the behaviors will continue, the difficult and dangerous behaviors. So what they wanted was to, yes, be in a safe environment for themselves, for their child. They wanted the relationship with their child to be improved. They wanted to improve communication with their child. And someone said, can you teach us to walk in the storm instead of working to avoid it? So some of these behaviors won't be avoidable. So like, how can you learn to self-regulate as a parent? How can you learn to live a good life even with a child who's highly complex? And how can we support co-parenting model, for example, having a family that looks different than a typical family, keeping that relationship, maybe sometimes even if we don't live all under the same roof. And of course, recognizing that some some siblings will be traumatized and will need support as well. And that's something that is maybe not talked about enough yet. Yeah, you can switch to the next one. So everything we presented right now is from the consortium. This was the first consultation, national consultation. You can have the full report on the website. Most of it is translated into French. And we're working on making the consortium sustainable. When I say we, I'm talking about the consortium because I'm part of it. It's not necessarily the AFCCA program, but we're working jointly in raising awareness, destigmatizing the issue, as well as creating support and evidence-based practice in Canada. And I'm proud to say that actually some countries are looking at us going, whoa, okay, and like, I don't know, a year, 2 years, you know, all this was accomplished, and some of them have been working on this topic for years, and they're not that far. So it's that's something to be proud of in Canada. Next one. Oh, I think that's the last one for me. Then you're next, I think.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, tornado and the family. So I was when I realized it was so stigmatized, this issue of AFCCA, I thought, yeah, I need to find a metaphor to explain it to people and not to be, you know, to stay respectful. So I thought of the metaphor of the tornado as a metaphor. So in every single family, there's going to be wind. The wind being children who misbehave, young people who misbehave, do dangerous things sometimes. We all experience it, but to different degrees. But someone who's experiencing AFCCA, it's on a little tension, a little wind here and there. It's a big tornado because it does leave devastation behind. It leaves trauma. Property is damaged. People will have difficulties with their mental health, and they will need support to rebuild. And sometimes they know there might be another tornado because of all the elements they have in their lives could create a tornado again. And so instead of saying the child's the issue, we're trying to use a tornado as a metaphor to say, yes, it does happen. It's just part of life, and we need to, I guess, understand the issue better and improve our system to recognize that and support these families and these children for better outcome. So next, Tanya.
All right. So when we decided to start this program and handle the tornadoes, one of the other pieces of the tornado, and this is going to come up later, but I just wanted to add to that, is if you had a tornado in your neighborhood, all of your neighbors would come and help you. And one of the difficulties that we're going to be bringing up with AFCCA is it creates a lot of isolation frequently. So that will be one of the themes we're going to keep talking about. When we started this program, we were starting from ground up. And so we decided to organize things as levels. So we look at families when they've disclosed that there's AFCCA, we've kind of put them vaguely in levels. They don't get stuck there, but so level 1 are families that have experienced AFCCA and things are better, but they know that it may come again. They may be families who are newer and they're starting to see some signs that AFCCA might be coming. There's, that kind of, but it's not really active. It's just there, kind of. It's the wind that's blowing, but it's not a tornado level. Level 2, you're seeing things become more entrenched. So you're seeing some signs, a lot more dysregulation, a lot more behavior things. A lot for what happens in families is often they don't know what to do. They start reaching out for support, possibly. The pattern starts developing. Level 3 are the families who have active, intense AFCCA. These are the families that are really often in crisis, or they can be on the verge of breaking down. They can be experiencing injury, lots of property damage. The mental health problems are becoming more, things like PTSD, we see a lot of different elements. I was going to ask Nancy before this because I can't remember the numbers that we ended up finding that we had, but this kind of shows how we're running our program. When someone's in the Adopt for Life world, we have our RPLs, which are regional parent liaisons. So it's really a parent-to-parent peer support network. And in level 1, we'll give some online resources. This is what we're doing as clinical leads, some training videos, tip sheets for the RPLs to give to the family. And we're doing, community trainings to build like this. Level 2, we're also doing some groups, and a lot of them the RPLs are leading. We might do some consultation with the RPL as they support the family. We're doing other groups. We're trying to establish an effective way to do safety plans. That's a bit of a complex issue, but we're working on that. And we support with advocacy and we're doing some other, actually the clinician-led therapeutic groups, it turns out we've had mostly level 3 families in, and we're doing some coordinated care planning. Level 3 families, we're doing much more direct support. Now, unfortunately, what we've discovered is the numbers are enormous, much more than we anticipated. So that's a reality we're facing. We're just becoming more and more creative all the time about how do we support as many people as well as possible and as effectively as possible. So we'll go more into how that's happening. So and this is how we're we're just over 6 months into this program, but I think Maude and I both now feel like we've got our feet under us. We know we have a much better idea of what we're doing, and we're starting to see some good results in some pretty highly complex cases. Maude.
And I think your questions about the numbers, I think we identify 400 something families across the province. We're 1.5 clinicians. And so the thing that happened too is I think people were saying that before, or some people were like, oh, maybe I'm the only one, I'm not going to say anything. And when we start talking about AFCCA, people start to disclose and say, this is what's happening in my home. Or we're just more able to recognize the signs now and go, okay, this is what's going on, like we'll do something. Okay, I'm totally off track with the slide, but anyhow, okay, family adaptation and resilience. I know resilience is a word that not everyone's comfortable with, but what that means is like, how are we able to adapt as a family? And there's a lot of factors at play, like risk factors versus protective factors. And I really like this model by Patterson because it helps us see what we can do, okay? And that explains family crisis. So we can think of, and we'll have a case study. So for example, okay, a family adopts and they go to all those parenting classes, it's going really well. They're quite competent. They have lots of resources in the community. So lots of capabilities. And then on the other side, they both work, maybe a stressful job, and then the child starts behaving in ways that are very difficult to manage, and more diagnosis, and then it adds stressors to their daily life, trauma, and so the scale goes, it becomes very off balance, and that's when we hit a crisis. So, and Tanya's going to do a case study to explain that well, but what we also want to add is that there's many equity-seeking groups who on top of this will experience microaggression daily. So for example, if a family is Indigenous or Black and they're concerned about calling the police when there's an incident, that just might add to the stressors. So we also have to keep that in mind when we're supporting these families who are from equity-seeking groups.
Thanks. Oops. Wait, what happened? There we go. My computer is catching up. Okay, so we wanted to kind of give a case study. So I'm just going to read this. I'm going to use my other computer to read it. So just a moment here. So Cindy and John are the parents. This is obviously not a specific case. This is just little pieces of all sorts of different cases, but it's very typical sounding of what we have been hearing and experiencing. So Cindy and John have become quite isolated in the past few years as their extent, oh wait, I'm not starting from the top. Hold on, scroll, sorry. Cindy and John, I'll start with them again, are adoptive parents. They have 2 bio children who are in their late teens and doing quite well. They have fostered children for 15 years and have taken many courses in parenting children who've experienced trauma and attachment issues. They adopted Charlie and Nevaeh, who were foster kids that they had, when they were 5 and 2 years old. They are bio siblings and were removed when they were 9 months and 3 years old from a home where they experienced neglect due to their parents' addictions. They also witnessed abuse. After removal, they lived in 3 foster homes. Charlie and Nevaeh are now 9 years old. They both have ADHD diagnoses and are on medication to help, but Charlie's medication doesn't seem to address the severe impulsivity. Nevaeh does fairly well in school. She struggles with math, but has good grades overall and causes few problems in the classroom, although she has few, if any, friends. She attends school regularly. Charlie, however, struggles in all domains. He is extremely aggressive with his mother in particular and has shown serious aggression at school. Currently, he only attends 1 to 2 hours of school a day when they can get him to attend at all. His mother cannot work anymore because she has to be home with him, and they have no other options for him during the day, which places the family under financial strain and means Cindy spends a great deal of time alone with him. He is now bigger than she is and has seriously injured her more than once. Cindy and John have become quite isolated in the past few years as their extended family and friends have stopped inviting them over and they've stopped sharing what is really going on in their home. People have called CAS on them when they have heard Charlie melting down in public, and they've been investigated more than once, but they've not been offered supports as there have not been child protection concerns. They have an FASD support worker who tries to help with school and has connected them to an FASD support group and some trainings. They've not been able to get an FASD assessment yet. They're on a wait list. Cindy and John have had to call the police more than once during particularly dangerous meltdowns with mixed success. Sometimes Charlie calms down. The police have frequently been good with their child and have proceeded to lecture them on how to manage. Twice, when Charlie is not able to calm, they took him to the hospital where he waited for a long time, was seen by a psychiatrist who made recommendations, but then the recommendations weren't followed through in the hospital. They were actually let go, and they were sent home with a piece of paper, which made recommendations like try letting him spend time in the shower or a feelings wheel, instructions on how to use empathetic statements like I can see you're upset. They're also told to attend a parenting class that teaches the circle of security, something they've learned already before, and were seen as not complying when they didn't attend that class. They've been offered financial help to get respite, but they have no idea where to go for help, and they're not allowed to use the respite during the day. They can only use it in the evening and weekends. It's also just it's difficult for them to know, they just don't have the energy to do the work to find that respite. Their older children avoid coming home because they find it too stressful there. Their marriage is strained with the stress, exhaustion, and conflict they now have on how to manage Charlie's behavior. Cindy tends to give in to Charlie's demands to avoid explosions, and John is more authoritative and he tends to punish Charlie. So you can see they have some useful supports on this scale. They have a lot of parenting experience, a ton of parenting knowledge. They've been to parenting classes. They have some understanding allies. So they have some capabilities. Their parenting capacity is actually great. Their own two children and their fostering experience was quite successful. But this isn't working anymore. And now we have school difficulties, exhaustion, trauma. They're developing health problems, especially mom. They're having troubles navigating systems because the systems in Ontario are kind of complicated. They have a lot of judgmental family and friends. That becomes really, really stressful for them. They have social isolation as a result. they have the aggression to deal with. That's obviously a demand. Neurodivergence, probably both children. It's especially apparent in Charlie. The services that they do get aren't fitting very well and aren't actually helping. When a service doesn't help, it actually becomes a burden. There's now financial strain. Oops, and there's probably more things that we could actually add to that, but that's the case study that, if you think about it, how incredibly complicated it is for these families to walk through this and what they're having to hold. And so as people attending this, you're often meeting these parents. You're seeing these kids and you're meeting these parents. And so one of the things I would love for you to be aware of is these parents have already had so many difficult experiences with professionals not understanding. And they're going to often come in to see a professional or be working with a professional or a school feeling like anticipating your judgment because they've been judged so often. So they might come in a little defensive. And that's just really important to realize that defensiveness comes from somewhere. They've experienced a lot of, our systems are not working great right now. We are seeing that over and over and over again. And these families are trying to navigate incredibly complex systems that we have troubles navigating. So yeah, we just need to be really, really respectful and try to keep ourselves on the capability side of the scale and not on the demand side of the scale. So mode.
Thank you. Yeah, you switch just slide. I'm like, no, don't come with the solutions right away. The top secret. So, and I shouldn't say solutions because they don't solve everything, but they're trying to rebalance the scale. Let's put it this way. One of the things that people said in the consortium is that the peer support is so important because, like Tanya said, like this family became very isolated. Like they think, yeah, we have support. But then when things go in a way that people just go, what's going on here? It's too stressful. They might blame the parents, then they become isolated. So having peers who said, oh, I get it. You know, I know what you're experiencing and it's very similar. The parents will go like, okay, maybe it's not me. Maybe it's not my parenting. It's, you know, I have a very complex child and then I'm in a very difficult situation. And for us as therapists, I guess we're seeing how similar some of their feelings are and their needs and experiences. And just that sort of normalizes the experience. And when I say normalizing, it's not like, oh yeah, it's fine. It's not a big deal. No, it's a big deal, but it's like, it's a valid experience and more common than we think. So there's 3 things that we can do other than the therapeutic strategies is making sure they have peers to talk to if they feel like that's their needs. The funding aspect, I'll talk about that later, and using safe language. And this one as well, I will talk about it more later. So we have 3 main interventions in our program. The polyvagal theory, I'll let Tanya explain it because she's so much better than me at explaining it. And the neural de-escalation. And I'm more of the NVR person. NVR is an intervention that was developed in Israel for families who are experiencing aggression from their child or highly controlling children. It was not developed for complex kids, but it became adapted to all sorts of issues. Like we're thinking, you know, novice drivers, highly anxious children, entrenched adults, you know, adults that are just not launching into life, OCD. So there's a really large body of research on this intervention. And I ended up doing a pilot as part of my PhD for families who are raising young people with FASD using NVR. And so that's what we're doing now. I guess we can go to the next slide, Tanya.
Yeah, there'll be more. So the polyvagal theory, when we were often, actually before COVID started, I started getting interested in polyvagal theory and signed up for some training, and then COVID happened. But I was able to do the training. And so polyvagal theory is started with Stephen Porges. A lot of people are more familiar with this now. I was taught by Deb Dana. So this is kind of a picture that she uses. It is very similar to the window of tolerance. It's just a different way of perceiving it. But what I like about this, how it works for me, is it describes actually our nervous system, our vagal nerve and sympathetic and autonomic nervous system, and how they respond to threat and safety. And so the way, what actually, it's interesting because Nancy and I started this. What happened was during COVID, I happened to have a number of people in my private practice who had complex kids with FASD usually, who were finishing high school and about to, were the right age to launch. And I realized how incredibly hard that was on their parents, because they're seeing their child who is pushing away from them developmentally and doesn't want anything to do with them developmentally, which is typical, but has often got not a matching emotional, social, and intellectual developmental skill set. So they really, really struggle. And they also have impulsivity issues and all sorts of things. So what I realized is the parents weren't okay. And if the parents aren't okay, they'll never be able to help their kids if their kids come back to them at some point for help, because they're not okay. So I decided to kind of experiment, and Nancy and I started a group, and the way we did it was we do 6 sessions. We use 3 maps that Deb Dana created to help people look inside and understand their own individual nervous system and their nervous system responses, their nervous system triggers, the things that make them feel safer, the things that help them stay in safety for longer. And so we do the 3 maps, but we also we invite similar people with similar child needs, so similar age groups, like teens, or the first group we did was people merging into adulthood, emerging adults. So we saw the parents and we just helped them get to know their own nervous system. And it's developed more and more. So we started it in Adopt for a Life, and now we're using it in a couple of different ways, but we have in the families who have the higher level of AFCCA that we can't support individually, we're bringing them into, I'm leading support groups for those families. So what we have are people who often haven't experienced or felt safety for a long time, and we're trying to remind them how to feel safety and trying to help them give themselves permission to recover, because what happens when you have AFCCA in your home, it's a little bit like, even if there is no tornado, you're watching for a tornado all the time. And what we're trying to help people do is, when there's not a tornado, experience the safety and recover, and that grows resilience. And it also helps when we're actually safe, we can do much better planning and much better thinking. But a lot of parents get stuck in, and stuck sounds so disrespectful, but they get feeling, it's almost like a superstitious feeling that if I'm not on, if I'm not hypervigilant, something bad is going to happen. And so it's addressing that and helping enable people to recover and feel safety and experience quality of life with AFCCA in their home. Now, we've also been able to kind of add, I'm going to go to the next slide, because Maud and I have been able to do this training called neuro de-escalation training that fits actually really well with both NVR and polyvagal. So it's just, now we've only had level 1 training, and it is still being, I think it's been developed, but it's still being translated into English and created. They're organizing it so they can keep training. So we won't be able to get higher levels for a little while, But Christian Gödel is he created it. He's a child and youth psychiatrist from Austria. And really what neuro de-escalation is about is it's that bottom up. It's not about using, there are words that get used, but it's about reaching the brain stem and trying to interrupt escalation before it gets too out of control. So there's a number of different techniques, but one of the parts of the techniques, and this is what matches parents doing polyvagal, is that piece of being safe and embodied and having the energy to meet your child, but not losing control. So it's about being able to connect with the escalation, but bringing safety, being the safe place that the escalating person can orient towards. So that, because if we're afraid, if we're angry, if we're in those kinds of states when someone is escalating, that and they orient to us, that will increase the escalation. And that's part of the pattern that happens in these families. And again, this is not about blaming parents whatsoever. It is a natural and normal thing to escalate. And if you don't feel safe, if someone is hurting you or doing things that you feel out of control, it's a normal and healthy thing to want to protect yourself. So learning ways to kind of counteract your own system or work with your system to respond better is what we're trying to do. So again, this depends on the parent and caregiver being able to regulate their own nervous system. So that's where the polyvagal comes in. And then it also uses these really cool distracting kind of emotional and physical nourishment. It's really funny when we've done case studies and Christian we'll do role plays. And I remember one in particular where someone was pretending to be the escalated child and he says, "Do you want me to make you a cheese sandwich?" And it was just such a shocking kind of interruption, but it interrupted the escalation, because then that child, the person playing the child, just kind of stopped and was not able to keep going. And so it's these really interesting techniques that he's discovered and is training us about. So yeah, and having that attuned energy, you can't be calm. So this is really important. Telling a parent to be calm when their child is escalating isn't actually effective. You have to be able to embody a similar energy level to your child without losing control. He also taught us something called a set, which I now use in the polyvagal groups to teach. I teach parents a set. It's borrowed from sports psychology. And it's a way to very quickly get your nervous system regulated but borrowing a little bit of that sympathetic energy so you can meet that energy demand of the escalating person. So some really cool stuff that we're learning in this. Yeah, but we have more to learn.
He's also talking about the nonverbal aspect of it. And I think what he said, it was like, if you're in fear all the time, he said, "Oh, you're traumatized by some of your child's behavior. You know, if something starts to escalate, you might appear fearful to the child, and that could, make things escalate." And it's not just telling the parent to go, okay, no, like try to have an effect that appears safe. It's like, it's way more complicated than that. So polyvagal is like trying to really rebalance the person's nervous system, the parent's nervous system, I guess. And then, so their nonverbal will also reflect that they are feeling safe. And when we say that, we know it's more complicated than just saying that. It's a big process. And some of, like, one thing that like an example he gave to me was like, I don't know, I really learned from that one, but the person was really dysregulated, and the nurse just went like this. And it's like, how do you get mad at someone who's like this, like offering something, kind of like offering support and help? I don't know, I just thought it was really interesting, because usually that's not really what we're tempted to do.
There's another piece, actually, it came up in the first time we met him, where he talked about how often there's not, when our nervous system gets triggered by danger, we want to fix it fast. And learning to pause and find your safety actually is really, because very, very rarely, and this is going to come up a little later, very rarely do we have to address things that second. There are moments, but most of the time we actually have some time to slow things down. Nancy.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to interject a question that came up now because it's so relevant. Is neuro-de-escalation, staying calm in the face of escalation, similar to co-regulation and integrating the concept of Dr. Perry's neurosequential model? And the person who wrote the question said, I use this method with my teens with FASD with great effect.
Okay, so there's a difference between calm and co-regulated, because calm is quiet, calm. And so I tell this story quite often. I had Graves' disease a number of years ago, and when I was hyperthyroid, I had a resting heart rate of 140, and I was a walking panic attack for a number of months. And I was doing my practicum at the time, and I had a classmate who was a yoga expert, and she was the calmest human being I've ever met. And I couldn't stand being in the room with her because my nervous system felt like she couldn't get it. So being calm isn't actually, being calm and quiet and low energy feels awful when you're escalated. So it's actually about attuning to and meeting the, oops, I don't know what happened there, meeting the energy level without losing your marbles. Is it similar to Bruce Perry? It is absolutely a bottom-up idea. It's about reaching the brain stem and stopping the automatic reaction in an escalation as quickly as possible before. So there's definitely some similarities there. And yes, I haven't had all of the, I'm familiar with Bruce Perry and have not had all of his training, and know that there is definitely some really useful stuff in that. But just really, we have to hear that if someone is escalating and we come at it calm, it feels disrespectful and like we're not hearing and seeing the need, and that will escalate things further. Yeah.
I think it depends what we mean by staying calm. If staying calm means not starting to scream or joining de-escalation, yes, right? But it's not necessarily having a straight face. Like you said, Maud, I have Graves' disease and it's super hard. I'm like, stay calm. You know, it's just aggravating.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more like matching. Okay, oh my gosh, that must have been hard, you know.
Yeah, we can do intense with our face and our body without, and we can feel it. But the difficult nervous system part is feeling it and being able to stay safely embodied in our own selves. Not catching the fear, not catching the anger, not catching the dysregulation. So staying regulated, we can co-regulate someone, but we still have to be able to match their intensity inside of us. And that's a difficult thing and often needs support, especially when you've experienced a lot of trauma.
But also sometimes it is dangerous, for real. It's not just, oh, feel safe. It's like, no, it's a real threat. And so that's another issue. Okay, NVR. That's my dada. That's what we say in French. So NVR, I briefly described what it was, but if you will be receiving a PowerPoint. NVR, if you click that link, I'll go on that website, you'll see under publication, there's like pages and pages of clinical trials that have been done on this on this intervention. And similar to neuro de-escalation and polyvagal, it's caregiver focused. And so you'll see that we're really focused on taking care of the parent, because a parent who's not well will have a really hard time taking care of their children well. And there's a big focus in the system on like, okay, we'll send a child to therapy, we'll give support to the young person. But then at the end of the day, this is AFCCA is a family issue, and it's also a systemic issue. So what we want to try to do with MVR is to bring the caregiver to have a good quality of life. And I'll show you what it looks like. So first of all, MVR was first, it was created in Israel, but it's something that existed in society where there's a lot of oppression. So for example, here you have a picture of Rosa Parks, and she's on the bus, and she was asked by a white person in the States to give up her seat because she was a Black woman. She refused. So that's what we call active resistance. So it's resisting the control, resisting the oppression. But she had to, and she did, suffer consequences from that, but she also had to surround herself with people who had similar ideas, similar values, to counter back the oppression. What does that mean in the family context is that we don't want to say that children are oppressors, not at all. They're actually impacted by neurodevelopmental disorders, mental health issues, but they get very controlling in many, many families. And so we want to have a parent who can stand their ground, say no, resist some of that control. It's also, it's value-based. So we want families to feel like they can live according to their values. And what does that mean? It's like, okay, so families who experience AFCCA, often they say, that's not really what I was envisioning, that I would be as a parent, someone who's losing their mind sometimes. I let my child, be in front of the TV all day long. That's really not what I wanted. I end up fighting with my partners in front of my child, and all these behaviors is because of the trauma, the complexity. So they do feel like they don't live according to their values. Or sometimes there's a lot of resentment towards the child. They're like, that's not the parent I wanted to be. So NVR stands for, how do you react to the control or the dangerous behaviors, but not in a way that seeks revenge, and in a way that's loving, but at the same time that doesn't accept all the behaviors. You can switch to the other slide.
I swear, as soon as I stop, there we go.
Okay. Well, I have to add more on NVR, but okay. Sorry, maybe I reorganized it, but one aspect of NVR is that we want to build a community of support. That's a really big piece of NVR, because isolation, well, actually,
those are coming later. Do you
oh,
want to
they're
do those
coming later.
now?
Okay,
Oh, yeah.
fine. Okay, I was like, where's my slide? Where's the? Okay, let's move to the other one. I'll talk about this.
Okay.
Okay, AFCCA and shame. Yes. So shame and AFCCA are strongly interconnected. Okay, parents will feel shame because they feel like they don't feel competent. And the parents that Tanya and I see, they're highly competent parents. They could teach parenting classes, but they are stuck in a situation that's very difficult. And maybe using the word stuck is not positive, but some people feel very stuck. So I'll use the word. They're quite isolated, like Tanya described. They might feel like they don't have good control over themselves because they've been pushed to a limit. And like I said, they don't feel like they're living according to their own values. So there's a lot of shame around that. So how to reduce shame in the parent is we want them to have a good social support. People who know that they're good parents and will encourage them and say, this is really hard. I see you, I hear you, and encourage them and keep going in their parenting journey. Want professionals to do that as well. Validate their concern, validate the experience, validate the trauma they have. And teaching them some strategies for self-control, like we talked about, like neural de-escalation, polyvagal, will really help for them to gain back a sense of, yes, I can do this, and become proud of those moments that, things escalate and they are able to breathe, step back or not respond violently, step away. And we want them to feel proud when they have those moments of like really good parenting, like I can join in the escalation. These are the things that we want for them to reduce the shame. And feeling like they live according to their own values. And so in NVR, we prioritize certain behaviors over others. And so what that means is like they need to feel proud that, for example, if one of their values is safety and they're able to bring more safety to their family, then they will feel pride and the shame will be reduced. And the shame too, like what it does to parents is that they might become very rigid. So you may see it sometimes with some of the families who experience AFCCA. It's like the ability of like hearing another suggestion or change the way they're doing things, it's difficult. And like I said, Tanya, because they've been so burned by professionals or by the judgment, sometimes their brain is less flexible when they're in a crisis. And I don't say that out of judgment. I've been there myself, not experiencing AFCCA, but in terms of crisis, we don't think necessarily creatively. And of course, children who display AFCCA, when we ask them later as adults, many of them don't display AFCCA anymore, and they do say, I was so embarrassed. So they don't want to apologize. They don't want people to know. They feel bad in the relationship. And they don't necessarily have healthy guilt. The shame is like, I'm a bad person. That's what they internalize. So how to reduce shame in the child is that we want the parents to always state their intention. Okay, I'm going to set this limit. Here's why. Possibly they won't understand, but at least we're trying to work on that perception. Talking about them, like, for example, if you have a partner, you can talk to your partner and say, I think, he's very concerned about what's happening in school today. I wonder how we can support him. And yeah, I don't know, but just validating their experience by talking about them and that they're overhearing what you said. This can reduce the shame. Doing relationship gestures. So if there's an incident, we will encourage the parent to do a little something for the child. So it cannot, not right after an incident, but let's say the next day you want to say, you know what, I made your favorite breakfast, or like a small note in their lunch bag, or something very small, but that will help them reduce the shame. Go like, okay, I'm still being loved, I'm still being supported, my parents still love me. And that's hard to do for the parents because they're still sometimes very traumatized about the incident. And when we're thinking of FASD, often they wake up the next day like, I'm fine, nothing happened, but the parents are still like, well, I remember, I'm still upset.
The other advantage, the other advantage in relationship gestures is sometimes it actually can help remind you of your values. I wanted to be this parent who could do these, who could make your nice favorite breakfast. And so doing it where it's not a reward or punishment, it's just, I'm just doing it because I am that parent and I love you for no other reason. It's kind of part of what that's about.
Yeah, living according to their values and what they wanted. So it's for the parents, and it's not to expect something in return. It's just dropping this here, So one thing that we have learned from the UK is violence, price, and secrecy. And that's a big one. If you remember something about the webinar, violence, price, and secrecy. And I think as therapists, we used to think, okay, we need to protect the kids and not say what's happening because, what are people going to think? Something about that. Like we were concerned about increasing shame. And then we realized if it's done well, the public opinion can really help the child and the family to feel supported. So we try to find supporters, and we'll talk about that later, that could text the child, visit the parents, text the parents, both parents, supporters for the parents, supporters for the young person, but do it in a way that is supportive. I'm concerned about you, what's going on. And for some youth, it actually works really well, especially if it's coming from a peer. So we want the school, maybe the social worker, therapist, you know, everyone's aligned and share a message of concern, of transparency. And it really helps with the family not be as isolated as they were.
Okay, oops. Want me to move on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
So obviously, this is pretty well. We've already been talking about the community and supporters, isolation, growth, aggression, shame, exhaustion. When an isolated parent becomes really worn out, and powerlessness. We all know, if we've ever been parents of teenagers, mine are now 19 and 21, that we go through the stage of having almost no influential voice because we suddenly, in our children's minds, become quite dumb. So having other people outside stating the same thing and sharing the same messaging helps a child understand, oh, this is actually a real role. It takes a village concept. It takes a village to raise a child. In Canada, we are not good at village, and COVID destroyed what villages many of us had. So isolation has become a bigger issue more recently. And we find that is sometimes one of the most difficult things working with these families, is trying to help find supporters that are effective and that are going to support in a useful way. How does it help when you have supporters? Can have respite, and your child can have relationship. It can help with de-escalation. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Well, you know, one of the things we've learned from NVR is just having someone that you can text, and they're going to pop into your home asking to borrow a cup of sugar, because often a child, once someone else joins, will de-escalate very quickly. Gives the parents understanding and connection, and hopefully gives a child that too. Other people who aren't living in it might have different ideas that are useful. It's one of the parent-to-parent support network benefits, but also other people in your neighborhood might have some cool ideas. It provides a buffer for parents against that adversity and helps them feel supported and connected. So it's incredibly, it is probably the most important and powerful thing that we can do, is to help parents find effective help. Lots of people cannot make the paradigm shift between bad behavior and there are other needs going on here. We don't want people as supporters that are just seeing bad kid, bad behavior. That isn't support. That's on the other side of the scale that becomes a problem. We need someone on the side of the scale that's going to understand some of the complexity. And we've got lots of information that parents can share with their supporters to help them understand and see if they can learn. I think that's good for that one. So you, Maud, you're up.
Yes, so we, and there was a question in the Q&A, so I'll answer it now. When I was talking about the shame, there was an element that said rainbow basket, and it's true, I didn't really cover it. So the basket exercise in NVR is that we will prioritize certain behaviors. So for example, verbal and physical aggression, and maybe we want the child to shower because some of them don't do hygiene anymore. And we will, you know, not focus on the behaviors that are maybe minimal for now, like not wearing a tube for school, for example. So we don't want the child to feel like they're being nagged all the time, and we don't want the parent to feel overwhelmed about all the behaviors that are not appropriate and needs to be corrected. Especially if you have a child with neurodevelopmental disabilities, you'll see lots of those behaviors. So we want to focus on those. And then the rainbow basket is basically when you see your child doing something good, even if it's minor, could be like, oh, was able to follow their routines, made their bed, you know, very small things. And some people have the rainbow basket on the fridge and they write it down. or some people just name it, depending on how it's also received by the young person, because some young person will have difficulties coping with positive comments. So you just, you know, you could say a little comment that is nice, you walk away, so the young person will not feel like, oh no, that's too much for me. You want to say something, Tanya? I see you.
Just a little thing.
Yes.
Sorry. and my son taught me this, and it's really hard sometimes to see how hard kids are trying because we see them failing. So another piece that needs to be noticed and can go able to
do it. Do we have to pay it all at once?
Oops, we can hear you, Catherine. Sorry. Another little piece that we can try to do is see them trying. My son once said to me, you know, you see when I don't do it, but you don't see how hard I try. And that was such an educational moment for me, because it's so easy for our kids. These kids get in trouble a lot, and they get criticized a lot. They see angry faces a lot. They need to see people tuning in and noticing how hard they're trying. So that's another rainbow basket-y kind of concept.
Thank you, Tanya. Okay, so to go back to, oh, her puppy was on her laptop. Interesting. That happens. You all have puppy problems, Tanya and I, Nancy as well. So, okay, supporters. I know that CES tries to do that as well. Like some social workers are trying to build a network of support, but sometimes I think, what are the supporters going to do? How do we recruit them? Like, what's their role? I think for some people, they think, okay, it's just to take the child, but there's way more than that can be done. Like, so we wrote here like some ideas of what supporters can do. And if you're thinking of the balance, so some of the daily chores or hassles that can happen that, you know, are in people's lives, we can rebalance that side. So like asking someone that we know, like a cousin, can you drive my son to his dentist appointment? Can you teach him to cook? Can you teach life skills? And so if you have many people doing little things that can really support the young person and the family, and if the child is too complex and the behaviors are too dangerous, sometimes they can even be online. Like, can you play video game with my son online every Thursday night? So I have a bit of a break. I know what he's doing. And sometimes it's just the support for the parents, like texting, calling, just being a witness also to what's happening in the home and being validating of the parent concern or the child's concern.
Sometimes even having a conversation that's not about the child, so that a parent can remember they still have gray matter that thinks about things other than their kid, is also useful. And also liking the child, things when a person can share an interest with your child. Our children often don't experience a lot of being liked. So that's a really powerful experience for our kids and feels great from a parent's perspective as well.
So much, yeah. And we encourage you to put that in writing, and even maybe have a call with all the supporters, explain what is AFCCA, what do the parents need. I also wrote letters to supporters, to schools, to explain the family's need, the young person's need, to explain it's quite often not willful behaviors. It's due to their complex need, brain differences. We explain it in a way that's comfortable for the family, and that usually brings some understanding. Sometimes, you know, the parents are like, no, this is this person won't change their mind. It's not help, you know, it's not going to help. And sometimes it's workable, and that increases the support for the family. I think you can.
Oh, we have a video. So this is a video that was made, and this is an example of some of the videos we have for families to help them understand. So this is one that was It's a short one.
Hi, my name is Joseph. I grew up with my uncle who kind of adopted me. I grew up in Uganda, and I lived in Uganda until I was 22 years old. And then I moved to Japan. That's where I met my wife. So, and then we moved to Canada, and life has been good. My uncle grew up in our family. And then when my dad passed away, I was like 2 years old, so I don't really remember. And my uncle ended up doing well, so he kind of provided that father figure, both as financially and as a figure who could guide me, who I could look up to as my father, right? Okay, and now it's really interesting because, I feel like the cards have rolled. I'm kind of in that position of an adoptive uncle. I have nieces and nephews who were adopted, so it's kind of neat to look at it that way. So growing up in Uganda, I grew up in a small village called Kagoma, and everybody knows everybody. So I didn't feel like my mom was my only mom, or I didn't feel like I did not have a father. Obviously, my uncle was a big factor in my upbringing, but as an entire village, they play a really big role in raising you up. If they caught you doing something you were not supposed to do, they will discipline you, right? Which is a little bit different here. And that would be okay. So that's kind of, how it is in Uganda is, you have to respect your elders, and you always feel like they are looking out for your best. I feel like here the system is not as supportive, right? The parents are the sole authority, which is very different in Africa. It's the village which is actually raising you up, right? Mm-hmm. So you never feel like you're alone. You never feel like you're an orphan. You always feel like you're part of a family, right? For me, it was my mom and my cousins and my uncle. I never felt like I missed a father. Whereas here, I feel like you can't say so much. You cannot correct somebody's kid. And it's kind of a touchy subject, even when the kids are not behaving the way they should. You can't really, it's so difficult to address that with the parents. They can be sensitive, or, I feel like here you have to be very careful when you kind of address somebody's kid's behaviors, which makes parenting a little hard, right? So that's kind of my observation, but also comes with advantages and disadvantages. Mm-hmm. So I think sometimes as adoptive parents, you feel like you're not getting anywhere. But the fruits really come later on in a kid's life when they grow up and, they interact with the world. They find out how blessed they were, how good their parents were, and they were like basically looking out for their interests. That's what I've come to realize and, be appreciative of my upbringing. But it didn't go so well. I did not take it so well when I was growing up. I felt like I was being punished for, not having a father. Nobody could put me in trouble, But it actually worked out well for me. So, I think the message for me to adoptive parents is, even though the results may not come in a year or two, I think eventually you're moving a needle and you're changing a life, and you're making their lives a little bit better, right? With the life and the love you're pouring into these kids. And obviously, I'm a living example. I'm a testimony myself.
Okay. I have to get the computer to. No. There we go.
Let's watch it again. Give us a break from talking.
You want to do this one?
Yes, I was like, does she have something to say about the video? But I think I'm just going to address this. So maybe some people work for CS and do adoption preparation. I used to do adoption preparation, and even when I adopted myself, we used to think we have to be the main caregiver for a child, for the attachment. And I thought, okay, so when I adopted my kids, I was like doing everything on my own with my partner and not having a lot of support because, you know, they needed to attach to me, especially coming from an orphanage. But then we start to realize that when we do that, the problem is that the parents get burned out, or they develop trauma, burnout, adjustment disorders, post-adoption depression. It's not really possible to adopt a child, especially older, with many diagnoses and do that alone, one or two people. Like they need to have other people who maybe at the beginning will be less involved with the child, but more involved with them, or give practical supports for many, many months. But eventually these young people with complex needs will need a community to care for them. Like he was saying, you know, in some, it's very North American to raise a child alone or think it's their sole responsibility. Like most communities in the world do that. Like they have, and like he said, it comes with disadvantage as well, but they have a village taking care of their kids. And one parent that I was talking to said, no, we don't need a village, you need a city. Because it's just so difficult sometimes. But yeah, so I think, and when I did my pilot, I was told by people from the UK, like, you know, it's a similar kind of culture, but it's, they found it very difficult in North America to change sort of like that perspective and that mindset. So it's being open to new ideas, I think, around that. So giving in escalation and joining escalation, we talked about it a little bit earlier, how, you know, discussing neuro de-escalation. So there's two patterns that we see in families who are experiencing AFCCA. Actually, it's in every family that these things happen, right? Like, let's say there's a conflict, either the parents will join in and then there's the conflict escalates, or the parent will like start arguing maybe a little bit and then they just give in, like, fine, I'll say yes because you're trying to avoid a situation. And sometimes, like, we all have those patterns sometimes, but sometimes the patterns become really entrenched. And sometimes, for example, you can have, let's say the mom is like joining, trying to calm the person down, and then the dad overhears it and will come and join de-escalation. So this is a pattern that we see sometimes. And then we're trying to help parents figure out, okay, what are my escalation patterns and where can I improve in that area, self-regulate and not give in, or join in de-escalation. Ask themselves some questions like, okay, is this helpful if I join in right now, or is it safe enough for my partner to deal with this on his or her own? So yeah, it's just to keep that in mind. We won't go into the details, I think, given the time.
And the difference with NBR is you're standing up against it instead of joining or giving in. It's like you're standing kind of firm, but without losing your marbles. Okay. Just wanted to give a few strategies that we've learned over time. So one of the things is the creating a safety plan, and we are doing this as much as possible. It's just there are so many safety plans needed and 1.5 of us, so that's a challenge for us. But if you're a professional that can help with safety plans, creating a very detailed, we were actually coming up with video and kind of a guideline for how to do an effective safety plan, which is pretty specific to different situations. So for example, I just helped someone create a safety plan specifically for when their partner was out of town, because they felt they were more vulnerable at that time and who to call, and thinking through that and creating that safety plan when things are calm and things are safe in anticipation of what could go wrong in the future is really, really effective, and helps you feel more regulated again in that situation. You don't go into the situation feeling as scared and then escalating because of your fear. I mentioned before, slowing down. All of us, when we're stressed, our processing speed slows down. A lot of our children with neurodevelopmental issues, their processing speed is already slow. So one of the things I've heard it, it's important to use simplified language, but also just slow down our talking, because it's really hard to escalate. If I talk like this, and that might sound really weird right now because none of you are escalated, but I'm going to tell you that when I'm working in an office with kids and I ask them, do people talk too fast? Almost all of them say yes. And when I talk like this and I ask, does this work better? They like it. So that's really important to hear and to practice. It feels really unnatural, but it works quite well. It works well for helping ground myself, and it works really well for co-regulating and helping someone actually hear the words coming out of your mouth. Matching that intensity, we talked about that already. Calling on supporters, we talked about that already. One of the most important things is the concept of striking when the iron is cold. This is an NVR. We talk about this a lot in NVR. Never try to solve the problem, fix what's going on in the moment. Teach a lesson. Don't teach a lesson when people are escalating. That's not the moment. It's really connected. And this does align with Bruce Perry, all of those other teachings about creating safety and then connecting and then correcting. Strike when the iron is cold. Okay, we have one more video. And this is our lovely Jen. So this is when you're going to see the other person in our team.
Hi there, my name is Jen and I am an Ontario mother of 6. 4 of my children are adopted, and I have several children who are neurodivergent and have significant needs. I know that if you're watching this video, you likely have experienced many of the same things I've experienced as a parent, and I wanted to chat a little bit today about the importance of building a network of supporters for yourself as a caregiver. So from one caregiver to another, I wanted to share a few things in building this network for me that have worked and some things that have not. Okay, I had to switch to my comfy chair for this next part because I just wanted to get real with you all, and I wanted to talk about the issue of asking for help. If you're like me, I know many of us as adoptive kin or customary care parents are the same in that we are afraid to ask for help. We don't want to inconvenience others. And a lot of times when we have reached out to ask for help, we've been denied the help we need. And it's a very isolating experience to be in that boat, and it makes you want to give up. So you might be watching this thinking, I've tried all this, I've tried to get the support I need, and I haven't been able to get it. Please hang in there and keep watching because I hope there's some tips here that can help you. So what I would love for you to do is maybe even right now while you're watching this video or later, it doesn't matter, to get out a piece of paper and physically draw on it who you would like to invite into your circle of support. So for me, this might look different for lots of people. Some people like to draw bubbles or one big circle. For me, it meant drawing a circle and really thinking and getting creative on there, what I needed help with and who I was going to turn to for that help. You might get stuck. I got stuck at first and couldn't even think of a single person outside of my immediate family. So don't be worried if you get stuck. It may take you some time. You might have to ask somebody else to help you think of supporters. First, you're going to list people on there that would be available at the snap of a finger by phone or text. So this doesn't have to be somebody who lives close by. This could be somebody who lives hours away, but it's literally somebody you can call when you're in a crisis to help either talk you through it or just from a practical side. Say grandma lives a province away from you, but you know that if you call grandma and put her on speakerphone, somehow that automatically de-escalates your child. Sometimes your child doesn't want anybody else hearing them being aggressive. So if they know speakerphone is on, the aggression comes down. The next thing I did was list a couple people that would be available to me physically. Is there a neighbor who would be understanding if you explained your situation that, hey, if I text you, I need help now, could you just come over and just walk right in the door? So they might just come over, walk in the door with an excuse. Maybe they'd say, hey, I need to borrow a gallon of milk. And sometimes that's just enough to get somebody else in the room, and it surprises your child and it gets them to stop, or it helps to get you into a safe place, because adding another adult into the room who's going to support you as a caregiver is incredibly important. If you don't have a neighbor, this might be a family member that lives close by. It could even be something as simple as a school teacher or an EA in the community that your child is kind of jived with and your family respects. So those are kind of your emergency supports. And then you want to broaden from there. You as a caregiver, you're not going to be able to really thrive or survive unless you have time really to have a break from your child and your family. So you're going to need to have supporters in your circle who are going to be available for you to take over so that you can get away and restore yourself. This could be a really trusted babysitter, or perhaps a child and youth worker who can come in and offer you some respite. Maybe it's a camp in your community, a church organization, a before and after school program, just as many outside village supports as you can get to schedule into your calendar regularly, daily, weekly, monthly, that you can get away and restore, so that you are able to come back and return to your child rested and just feeling internally strong. I want to put a little caveat in here, and that is to be selective and careful. You want people on there that support both your child and you as the caregiver. It's surprising how many people you will ask for help will come in and be very supportive for your child. They'll try to be your child's BFF, and they won't support you as much as the parent. And then what ends up happening is they drive a wedge between you and your child and the attachment you are trying to build together. And this isn't just family and friends who can do this. There are professionals, there are therapists who do this as well. So be really careful and selective, and make sure you are choosing people in your village that are going to, yes, connect with your child and be there for your child, but that are always going to keep directing your child back to you as the caregiver, reinforcing the bond. Once I figured out that my circle needed to be full of those types of people who also valued me as a person, that made me feel like I didn't need to be a doormat, all of a sudden things got a lot better in my ability to parent my children, in my ability to have healthy boundaries for myself, to take care of myself. And please know that even if you're in a really desperate situation right now and you don't feel like you have help, you don't feel like you have anybody you can turn to for support, there are people out there that want to help. It could just be too, you've maybe asked them for help, but they didn't know how. So be specific. Tell them exactly what you need them to say in scenario A, B, and C. And you'll be surprised at how many people actually do really want to be there for you. So I hope there was something here in this video that's helpful to you. I wish you well, and I hope you're taking good care of yourself. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Okay, give me a second. We are so grateful to have Jen on our team. She is such a wonderful support for our families. I know we might have some educators in the room and therapists, and I just wanted to say, I want to give a little bit of an example of a team of support and how it works. And it's about, you let the other people on the team know something's happened. And so when they see the child, they say, hey, I hear this happened. Not, oh, I heard you were being really rotten at home this morning, or, it really has to come across as non-judgmental, but I see what's happening and I'm part of your team. Stop. Sorry. I'm part of your team. So I just wanted I want to describe what happens in Adopt for Life with a family. So let's think about that case study, the couple that we saw before, what it would look like in practice in our agency at this point, because it is definitely always changing. The first thing, there would be a family would tell their regional parent liaison that they're experiencing AFCCA, and there would be an AFCCA intake. They would be kind of put in, we would identify them as a family with AFCCA. Then the RPL would be looking for the practical supports and also consents to make sure we can talk to people. So are their financial needs okay? Are there financial needs we can help with or get them help with? Do they have any respite? How are things at school? How's that relationship working with the school? Do they need any advocacy? How are things in the community? Who do they have in the community? Who are their supporters now? Then we would help them connect with groups. So we have a private Facebook group for AFCCA families where they can talk with each other and share information, and that's monitored. We also have drop-in peer support groups that are run by RPLs that people can go, anyone can go to if they're in that, they're invited to. We also try to do a safety plan, again, work on that. Then we have the clinician-led groups, so the polyvagal group that I would be leading with help of usually Jen. I also do some with Nancy. And so when those groups are really useful for increasing, and both of the support groups, the drop-in support groups and the polyvagal group, start decreasing isolation, start people feeling like they have a community. One of my favorite things a mom once said to me is she was feeling like a terrible mother. And she said in the group, she looked around and she saw all those incredible parents in the group, and it helped her realize she was one of those. She's not actually a failure as a mother. There's a lot more going on. So then we would, we get them in the polyvagal group, try to work on that self-awareness, self-regulation, being okay again in their own skin in this situation, and being able to recover from all of their stressors. And then we create smaller, intense NVR intervention groups. So we kind of very purposefully will put families with children under 12 or families with adolescents together because the needs are so different in those different stages. We have our first 2 groups running now, and the first one is about to end next week as far as a group. But what we do with those is we have a group, one-to-one clinician to family, and then we have a group session, and then we do in between, we have one-to-one sessions, 6 groups, and then one-to-ones in between to help people integrate what they're learning and start to put it into practice and support them and get more supports that they might need. Oh, this one's yours.
So possible outcomes. This is what we would like to achieve. And sometimes we don't achieve all of this, but at least some part we would like to achieve with the program. We want families to feel more competent. Like I said, quite often they lost their parental self-esteem. So we want them to feel like, yeah, I'm a good parent, but I have a complex child. Feeling that they're connected to others in the community, connected with friends, family, connected with people who get it. And also, hopefully, they are better able to self-regulate. And what it could lead to is that they're more able to not join in the escalation, have better boundaries, able to say no when they need to. But also a change in perspective or narrative. So sometimes all situation is unique, but they might say something like, if you're thinking of the case study, like, I failed as a parent, why did I end up adopting? And they have all this narrative that is maybe very negative, but we want to see a change in narrative, whereas they will say that, yes, I'm a competent parent, but here are the things that I need to improve. Here are where I need more support. And so we want a narrative that's more positive, and where they don't feel like victims. They feel like they're the heroes of their story. That sounds cheesy, but that's what we want. And hopefully we want a child and parent to have an improved relationship. Sometimes that's complicated because of the child's needs, but there's still ways for parents to have a good relationship with their child. Even with the aggression and the AFCCA being displayed, we would hope that the AFCCA will be reduced. But even when it's still happening, sometimes we want parents to be able to parent their child. So you can switch.
Okay. I wanted to just add something that I don't know that we're always aware of with our strength-based approaches. And this is not me complaining about strength-based approaches. It's incredibly important. that we see a child's strengths and that we help develop their strengths, that we give them opportunity to express their strengths. But here, I want you to hear what happens to a parent when they have a child who has invisible disabilities and aggression. They have spent years, first of all, figuring out what's going on for themselves, then advocating to get assessments, then advocating in schools for supports, advocating within their families and friends every time they hang out with them to try to explain what's happening in the behaviors and how to treat them and all the different things. And then they go to a new professional and the professional says, oh my goodness, your child is so great. They're really smart. I really enjoyed spending time with them. And that's wonderful, except what a parent hears is, you don't see it. You don't see it. You don't see the problem. Here I have to advocate again. You think I'm the problem. That's what happens inside a parent. They have heard, that's how boys are, or he'll grow out of it, or he's a bad kid. Those are the things that happen with aggression. And it's so exhausting and deflating for parents. So I just want you to hear what they need to hear is, I see your child's strengths, name those strengths, say it. And I see how much you are struggling. I see how difficult this is for you. This must please validate the challenges. And if you can't see the challenges, listen to the parents, because parents so very rarely want to talk badly about their kids. They really want people to see what's great about their kids. But I mean, I helped a parent go get their child assessed last summer, and they were terrified of taking their child because they were afraid that the assessment was going to show there was nothing actually wrong. And that's the terror that every parent who sees a ton of things going wrong, and honestly, the school that child was in couldn't see what was happening. They were perceiving things a certain way, and actually, unfortunately, causing harm because they weren't able to understand the trauma that they were seeing. And when the first visit they saw the psychologist, the psychologist said, she's just such a lovely little girl, and the parents walked away terrified. Now, fortunately, they then, after a few sessions with the psychologist, also walked away with a huge amount of evidence that there was a lot going on. But please just hear, for a parent, if you only talk about the positives and you don't validate how difficult things actually are, they are going to have such a hard time trusting you, and you've just increased their burden. Mode.
So safe language, we didn't talk much about CAS. So if you go back to the levels that we talked about at the beginning, usually that process of like neural de-escalation, NVR, polyvagal, we try to do that with level 2 families. Sometimes when we get the reference, the parents are already on the verge of having their child living somewhere else, or sometimes the child has been in the hospital for months or on a TCA. TCA, for people who are not working for CS, is temporary care agreement. And so there's so much change to do in the system and how we talk about it. One of the big issue that families told us is that when the child's on a TCA, CAS will use terms like abandonment. And we understand it's like a box that they need to click. Okay, the child won't be returned home. But that's very triggering for parents, because some parents, it's so dangerous for them or for the other kids in their home that they do need to send the child to live somewhere else. But they don't, nobody does that like, oh, I don't care. Like, it's highly traumatic to get to that point, and then to hear you're abandoning your child is just, it's extremely triggering and actually not respectful. And actually, this is something we heard all over the country, because we all have, the systems are all different in different provinces, but this is an issue that happens all the time. And quite often parents say, I want to keep my parental rights, I don't think I can have this child living in my home full time. But I want to keep my parental rights. I still want to advocate for my child. I want to keep a good relationship with my child. And often parents, to receive support, they have to relinquish their parental rights. And that's a systemic issue that we feel like should really change. We met so many people working for CS who also see this issue, and the ministry is like, no, we want parents to keep their parental rights, but it seems like the system, it's not working towards that. So please avoid the word abandonment, child protection concern. Like sometimes the TCA in place, and they will say, well, there's a risk for abandonment, and we're concerned about the parents' mental health. But anyone who's experiencing AFCCA is high risk for separation and is high risk for mental health issues. So those to us are kind of like chicken or the egg thing. They're not really a child protection concern. What they need is support, not necessarily an investigation and then say, okay, we're closing the file. And instead of saying violent children, aggressive children, we would say children who display AFCCA, who display aggression, and always try to put it into context of why there's this thing happening. We saw in some regions that we won't name, like sometimes like parent blaming, like big time, and it's not helpful at all. Like these parents are going through really hard things. They need the respect for support. They need us to validate their experience, their fear. And I think it's best to ask, like, what you've done so far. And if when you're listening to the story, you can hear like how many courses they've been to, like their knowledge is extensive for most of them and their skills. So yeah, I think that part's really important. And we'll develop guides in how to safely talk about it, the same way they do for FASD and other developmental disabilities.
Okay. Just I just wanted to very briefly, because we're starting to run out of time. So I'm just going to really briefly say another piece is we want to recognize that supporting these families is difficult. Not because the families are difficult, but because this is heavy, complex stuff, and it's hard. So we want to acknowledge that a lot of times we all feel helpless in facing the situations, and COVID exacerbated everything. It definitely made this all more frequent, more intense, and it eliminated a number of supports that we used to have.
Yeah.
So we really are at this place where we need creativity. I years ago took very briefly some theater sports classes, and that's like improv theater. I didn't take it for long because for a good reason. But one of the rules is no blocking. And no blocking means when someone starts something, I take it and say yes, and I don't go, no, we're doing it this way. It's about collaborating. It's about growing things, about being creative. And I think we are really identifying some clear needs in our systems. The systems need to be solution focused. And just so you all know, we are developing a community of practice because we need to collaborate. We need all of the good minds, the good intended people to work together to help create the change that we need here. So let's just quickly take turns. So we're pretty much done this. We're just going to show you some of the things that we as Adopt for Life are offering. So these are just different workshops that are available, and you can book them. So you'll get this so you can look at it more later. Oh, these are our webinars that we're doing right now. So this is the first one, and we're going to have 2 more for Children's Aid Societies and Justice. Mo, do you want to?
Oh, yes, night sheet. What is it?
Well, never mind. I was saying we can take turns, yeah.
Yes, and Nate sheet on supporting escalation and regulation in children and youth. He's got a lot of really good YouTube video, but we'll have the privilege to have him soon.
this has already started. It's an AFCCA support group specifically for men because often men, fathers, people who identify as a father are having a different experience. It's a different experience. They're often not the primary caregiver. They're often, yeah, anyway. So we wanted to have a group specifically for men, and that's going quite well. Nancy, do you want to talk about this one? This one's your baby.
Sure. So for those of you who are supporting families with children with FASD, this is one of my absolute favorite resources. It's a book, but there are also free downloadable worksheets at this link where young people with FASD develop their own self-advocacy skills. There are worksheets where they write about their strengths, their challenges, their triggers, and strategies that work for them when they're triggered, which actually really relates to AFCCA. In fact, those worksheets would be applicable in other situations if you were supporting someone, for instance, with autism or ADHD and showing some of these challenging behaviors. And we're going to be developing something similar for teens, but it will probably be in a different format. So keep your eyes out for that.
Sorry. And this is just our stay connected. I'm going to stop sharing because we want to get to some of the questions.
Yeah, I'll just say, if you are a professional or a service provider, you can join the Adopt for Life community. You'll be sent our professional newsletters. You'll get updates about webinars and other upcoming things. We do have a lot of things at Adopt for Life that anybody can access, including a resource library. So you'll have the website address when you get the PDF of this. The resource library is broken down by topic, including AFCCA. So I think you'll find that also as a very helpful resource. We did not have a lot of questions, but we do have some. Some have been answered along the way. I'm just going to pull up one of them, but while I do that, Tanya, can you let us know the name of the neuro de-escalation trainer?
Oh, it's Christian Gottel. It's on the slide. So if you look at it, it's Gottl, and it's got one of those. Oh, I can't remember what they're called over top of the O. But anyway, if you Google, he actually has YouTube videos. There is some information online about him.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question that came up very early in the webinar. I'm not going to give all the identifying information because I think that there are too many details to share, but the person has written, I'm a Black French Canadian. My adopted daughter is Black and 9 years old. She was adopted at age 3. She has been aggressive toward me mostly, but my wife as well. My wife is Chinese Canadian. A therapist suggested that our daughter had Black mom anger. Does this make sense?
So, okay, let's say we just go with gender for now. In heterosexual couples, it's often towards the mother from research. In same-sex couples, we don't know, but it's often towards one more than the other.
Would it be the primary caregiver more? Because there's usually a primary caregiver as well.
Yeah, who's more present in the home, like
who has to say no more often?
Yeah, I think it's also personality wise. Sometimes, like, you know, like, yeah, but I there's no research to say like, is it the skin color for this, the ethnicity for this specific person? I think we need more background information than, like, you know, sometimes you need to dig deeper on why the person's using aggression towards someone more than the other person. Sounds like a quick answer for the therapist to say that, but maybe it is, I don't know.
We actually have a few more questions as well, so I'm just going to move it along, although I know you have more that you could share on that one. Would you have an example when your response to escalation is not calm? What would you do or say instead?
So quickly, I mean, you can, there's a couple of things. You can actually escalate your voice without being angry. So, oh my gosh, I can see it, something's really, you know, so talking fast and then bringing it down. So you can escalate with, you know, voice, with tone. You have to be careful with those things, but just having that intensity in you of, you can see intensity in someone's face. You can feel it in their body. So you don't necessarily have to, so the tricky part is often we want to be calm because then we feel like we're not going to lose our marbles. But we need to have that energy of intensity. Otherwise, we're not meeting the person where they are. And hopefully you can meet the person where we are. And if you can regulate and come down, often they will follow. And that's really quite effective. So that's the best I can give quickly.
So we have 2 more and we have 2 minutes left. So curious if you have suggestions on how to nudge parents and or caregivers to a place where they are willing to participate in the parent caregiver supports. I am thinking specifically of families where caregivers continue to express that they want the child to understand and therefore are focused on seeking individual supports therapy for the child.
Mo, do you want to take that one?
Yes.
The fix the child model.
Well, but at the same time, we're not saying that, I mean, our job at Adopt for Life is to take care of the caregiver, but we still refer to child therapists that we know are adoption competent and who are learning about AFCCA. I feel like sometimes if parents are not feeling validated and they're concerned, they may sound like they are going the child. And it's probably true to their defense that they wouldn't have these problems if the child was neurotypical and compliant, right? So yes, I think they feel like that's the solution here. If the child is easier in their behavior, that problem will be fixed. But yeah, so I think, validating their experience, exploring creative solutions, and sometimes that's providing support to the child, but also to the parent. But I think validating the experience and being creative with them about, okay, what about this,
I'm going to pop out because I have a group in 1 minute. Thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you, Tanya. I think we can ask one last question and then we're going to do our wrap up mode. I'm wondering if you have any resources, strategies on how to support caregivers on feeling a sense of forgiveness toward a child after incidents, trying to break some cycles of stress and starting each day fresh.
To us, that's the polyvagal part. It's because people are learning to regulate themselves when an incident happens after and recover more quickly. So let's say my child has something, I'm very angry, then I stay in that anger, but if I have the awareness of, okay, this is impacting me, this is impacting my family, then I have some strategies to go back to a sense of safety and maybe forgiveness. I know I have some mantra, and I know many caregivers have mantra, to me, when I'm angry at my children, I go bigger, wiser, stronger. That's what parents are supposed to be like, and that helps me ground myself. For others, it's something else. That's my quick answer in 30 seconds.
Well, I think we're going to have to end it there. Thank you, Maude, and to Tanya. Thank you to all of you most sincerely for joining today. When you log out today, you're going to receive a survey on your screen. Please fill it out. It helps us so much to learn what we're doing well and what we could improve. There are always things we could do better, so we'd love to hear from you. You will be receiving a recording of this webinar automatically within the coming week. And I believe we'll be able to send the PDF slides. We didn't discuss that in advance, but we'll discuss, and if we can send those out with the webinar recording, we will. If you ever want to reach out to us, our email is AFCCA no S on the end, at adoptforlife.com. That was at the end of the webinar. And thank you so much for joining us today and for wanting to learn more about how to support families who really need us to be part of their village. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.